On a serene autumn morning, Thomas Walker, with his silver hair meticulously combed back, made his usual way through the small town of Maplewood, New Hampshire. Thomas, a retired 70-year-old librarian, maintained a quiet routine that always included a visit to the Maplewood Community Library, a red brick building in the heart of the city, surrounded by centuries-old oaks and pews in the square where generations had grown up reading and sharing stories. As he approached the main entrance, Thomas noticed a newly placed sign by the door. The bold letters announced something he would never expect to see: closing notice. This library will be permanently closed at the end of the month due to cuts in municipal funding. His heart sank. How could such a vital place for the community simply disappear? Inside the library, the usual silence was now punctuated by a worried murmur. Thomas greeted Mrs. Johnson, the chief librarian, who seemed visibly shaken. "It's a real tragedy, Thomas," she said, her eyes sweeping the room full of children reading and old people flipping through newspapers. "I don't know how we're going to tell everyone that their days here are numbered." Thomas, with a slight nod, approached the loan desk, where small groups discussed the warning. "We can't let that happen, Sarah," he said firmly. "This place is more than books and shelves. It's where the community meets, learns, and grows. Let's fight for it." Inspired by a sense of urgency, Thomas decided to act. Over the next few days, he spent hours on the phone, contacting former colleagues, friends, and anyone who believed in the cause. He organized a community meeting in the local church hall, the First Church of Maplewood, to discuss the situation and formulate a plan of action. On the night of the meeting, the church was full. Citizens of all ages, from young students to the elderly, had come to show their support. Thomas took the podium with a confidence he had not felt since his active days as a librarian. He looked at the crowd, cleared his throat, and started talking. "Good night, friends and neighbors," Thomas began, his voice echoing across the hall. "We're here for a reason that touches all of us. The Maplewood Community Library, a pillar of our city for more than 5 decades, is at risk. But together, we have the power to save this vital center of learning and encounter." He went on to detail the impact the library had had on education and local culture, from hosting reading clubs to hosting educational events for children. "We cannot allow this place of discovery and encounter to close its doors," concluded Thomas, his eyes sweeping the room for signs of encouragement. "We will form a committee to explore all possible options, from fundraising campaigns to dialogues with our municipal representatives." Thomas's appeal was not in vain. Hands rose, voices offered to help, and renewed energy filled the room. At the end of the night, a committee was formed, led by him and supported by dozens of volunteers determined to save the library. As people began to disperse, Thomas stood on the podium, looking at the now almost empty hall, feeling a mixture of hope and determination. He knew the fight would be long and possibly difficult, but he was ready to lead that effort. In the days following the church meeting, Thomas found himself immersed in a marathon of activities. Each morning, he left his home in the quiet neighborhood of Orchard Lane, armed with a briefcase full of documents, plans, and contact lists. The committee, made up of local enthusiasts, met regularly in the library's conference room, now transformed into headquarters for its rescue campaign. One of the first steps was the creation of an awareness campaign. Thomas and his team produced explanatory booklets and vibrant posters with slogans like "Books Open Minds," "Libraries Open Hearts," and "Save Our Library, Save Our Future." Young volunteers, such as energetic high school student Emily Carter, distributed these materials at the local Maplewood Fair and at the entrance to the municipal market, addressing passersby with a mix of anxiety and hope. Meanwhile, Thomas sought support beyond the city limits. He wrote letters to library alumni who had excelled in various professions, soliciting their support either through donations or political influence. Some responses were promising financial aid and even participation in fundraising events. However, not everyone in the community saw the library as sentimental as Thomas. During a city council meeting, the mood was tense when the library issue was raised. The mayor, Stephen Haynes, and some advisors, particularly local businessman Richard Donovan, expressed their doubts. I understand and respect your passion for the library, the mayor began, his words sounding cautious. But we must consider the financial realities. Our budget is stretched to the maximum, and we need to prioritize. Richard Donovan, always a pragmatic businessman, was more direct. It's a matter of numbers. The library site is well worth it, especially for developers interested in expanding the mall. We have to think about the economic growth of the city. Thomas, who was in the audience, felt a mixture of frustration and challenge bubbling inside him. Rising quietly, he asked for the floor and spoke with a clarity that surprised even his allies. With all due respect, Mr. Donovan and Mr. Mayor, the library is more than a number in our ledgers. It is a center of learning and a refuge for many in our community. We cannot simply measure its value in terms of commercial potential. What we earn in money, we lose in community culture and cohesion. Thomas's response generated murmurs of approval among some of those present. But the debate was far from over. In the days that followed, committee meetings became more frequent and intense. Thomas knew adversity head-on, but also moments of doubt. On a particularly difficult afternoon, after an exhaustive planning session, he found himself alone in the library, walking the quiet corridors. He sat at one of the reading tables, letting his fingers slide over the worn contours of a poetry book. It was there, surrounded by bookshelves filled with literature, history, and science, that he felt a renewal of purpose. "This fight is worth it," he muttered to himself, Emily's words echoing in his mind. "We can't give up now, Mr. Walker, not when we're starting to make a difference." Galvanized, Thomas organized a fundraiser, an art auction and rare books donated by local residents and alumni. The evening of the event was a mix of culture and communitarianism, with the community gathering in the church hall, now adorned with paintings and sculptures. There, Thomas not only raised funds, but also reinforced the intangible value of the library. As the night came to an end, with the last checks being written and the last pieces of art being carefully packaged, Thomas looked around, watching faces illuminated by smiles and bright eyes of hope. He knew the journey was not yet complete, but every step, every conversation, every penny collected, strengthened the mission he had embraced so fervently. As summer approached, the fervor around the Maplewood Community Library reached its peak. Thomas's campaign had become a celebrated cause, attracting attention from the entire region. Local and regional journalists covered the development of the situation, and the library, once a mere haven of books and silence, was now often filled with cameras and microphones, capturing every event organized by Thomas's committee. Inspired by the success of the art auction, Thomas organized a Maplewood Literary and Cultural Festival to demonstrate the cultural vitality of the library. The festival included presentations by local authors, writing workshops for children and adults, storytelling sessions, and a used book market. Throughout the day, musicians from the city cheered the environment with live performances, and families enjoyed food sold by local restaurants. However, the real proof came when the city council announced a decisive meeting to discuss the future of the library. The community was mobilized, and the council room was crowded on voting day. Thomas, wearing his best costume, prepared for what could be the most important speech of his life. He began by reminding everyone present of the immense impact the library had on Maplewood's education and community life. "Ladies and gentlemen of the council," he said, with a voice that carried both urgency and passion. "This library is more than a building. It is the beating heart of our community. She offers more than books. It offers hope and opportunity to all who cross its doors." As Thomas spoke, glances turned to Mayor Haynes and Councillor Donovan, whose expressions were indecipherable. After the conclusion of Thomas's speech, a tense silence fell on the room, broken only by the mayor who called the next speaker. The mood was full of tension when Richard Donovan took the floor. To everyone's surprise, his speech took an unexpected turn. "For weeks I have been listening to arguments from both sides," he said pausedly. "And while it is true that we have to consider the economic aspects, we also cannot ignore the intangible value that our library represents." Whispers of surprise roamed the room. Donovan went on to reveal that she had visited the library in recent days. observing the various activities and the number of people she attracted. "I saw with my own eyes," he admitted, "and I cannot, in good conscience, support the closure of such a vital place." The vote was tense, but in the end, the council decided by a narrow margin to keep the library open, with conditions to revisit the funding annually. The room burst into applause and exclamations of relief and joy. Thomas, thrilled, felt tears welling up as colleagues and friends embraced him. In the following days, a wave of optimism swept through Maplewood. An anonymous benefactor, driven by community dedication and media coverage, donated a significant amount to the library fund. This donation allowed not only to maintain current operations, but also to plan future improvements and expansions. Thomas, now seen not only as a retired librarian, but as a true community leader, was often invited to speak at events in schools about the importance of perseverance and civic engagement. The Literary and Cultural Festival has become an annual event, growing in size and impact each year, symbolizing the renewal of the Maplewood Community Library as a vibrant center of culture and education. Thomas's campaign, initially an effort to save a beloved space, turned into a movement that redefined what a library could be for a community. In that library, between the shelves now filled with new and old books, a small plaque was installed, with a quote that Thomas liked to repeat. "In every community there is a meeting space where the spirit of the place manifests itself most fully. For us, it's here between pages and people." Thus, the Maplewood Community Library continued to be this essential space, preserved and enriched by the tireless effort of its citizens and by a man's unwavering belief in its immeasurable value. With the library now securely funded and the community spirit at Maplewood renewed, Thomas and the volunteer committee began the revitalization phase of the Maplewood Community Library. The news of the successful rescue and the generous anonymous donation had spread a new enthusiasm for the city. The community was eager to see how their beloved library would transform. The renovation plans were ambitious. The library would be not only a place for book lending, but a real community center, with spaces for workshops, a cafe area, group study rooms, and a large event room. Thomas, along with local architects and designers, dedicated himself to ensuring that every aspect of design reflected the essence and needs of the community. The day the renovation started, Thomas was there, safety helmet on his head, ready for the first symbolic knock on the old wall. The local press captured the moment, symbolizing the beginning of a new era for the library. "Today, we are not only breaking physical walls, but also barriers between people," Thomas said in an interview. His vision of a space that united generations and cultivated learning had begun to materialize. During the months of construction, the library functioned in a temporary location, but community interest and support did not decrease. Volunteers organized traveling reading clubs and workshops in schools and parks, keeping the flame of literature and education burning as the library was being transformed. Finally, after 6 months of hard work, the new Maplewood Community Library was ready for its grand reopening. The renovated building was a work of modern art, but with classic touches that respected its history. Large windows allowed natural light to bathe the interior, wooden shelves displayed a vast collection of books, and inviting seating areas offered spaces for conversation and discovery. The day of the reopening was a festive event, marked by a palpable feeling of accomplishment and joy. The community gathered in large numbers, with entire families, local authorities, and even visitors from neighboring towns who came to witness the revival of the library. Thomas, the man at the center of everything, cut the ceremonial ribbon, his hands shaking slightly with the emotion of the moment. "This place is a testament to what we can achieve when we unite for a common cause," he addressed the assembled crowd. "It's more than a library. It's a home to our curiosity, our learning, and our growth as a community." After the ceremony, the library doors opened to the public. Children ran to the youth section, where a storyteller was waiting for them. Adults and seniors explored the new facilities, many settling into the coffee area to enjoy a book with a cup of coffee. The workshop space already had a full calendar of planned activities, from digital literacy classes to creative writing workshops. In the following months, the Maplewood Community Library saw its frequency triple. Local schools integrated library visits into their curricula, and community leaders regularly used the space for meetings and events. The library also launched a series of lectures, bringing authors and experts to talk about varied topics, further enriching the cultural life of the city. For Thomas, each day in the library was a sweet confirmation that all the effort had been worth it. He spent many of his afternoons there, sometimes leading reading groups for children, sometimes just watching the life of the community unfold around him. His legacy, he thought, would be measured not by the honors or recognitions he received, but by the vitality and joy that now filled those spaces. As the first anniversary of the reopening approached, the community planned a special celebration. A year of new stories was the theme, with events highlighting everything that had been achieved. Thomas was honored, but in his speech, he shifted the focus away from himself. "Look around," he said with a smile that illuminated his face. "You, all of you, are the true heroes of this story. Together, we wrote a wonderful chapter for Maplewood, and I believe many more will come." With these words, Thomas Walker reaffirmed the immeasurable value of a library not only as a storehouse of books, but as the beating heart of a community, a place where each member, young or old, could find stories that resonated with their own lives and dreams. If you liked this exciting story, help us by leaving your like and subscribing to our channel. Until the next story.